Hello, my name is Hannah Newberry. I will be presenting my final project on the Return from Bohemia by Grant Wood. This work is located at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Hopefully you all will find this presentation to be informative, as this is a very historical drawing. As shown in Figure 1, this particular drawing by Wood is significant because its original purpose was to be the cover on his autobiography, also to be entitled The Return from Bohemia. His autobiography was never published, however. Grant Wood fine-tuned his artistic skills in Paris, but eventually returned to his roots in Iowa. The work is quite representative of Grant Wood's journey from Iowa to Paris and back. The Return from Bohemia was created in 1935 in the period of American regionalism. After the Great Depression, a movement of artists emerged that rejected city life and emphasized valuing one's hometown and rural values. The 1930s was the decade in which regionalism was most popular. America had previously looked to European cities such as Paris for artistic advice, but many artists believed that isolation from big cities was beneficial to feel a sense of pride in one's own country. The majority of Americans lived in rural areas at this time, so the obsession with European avant-garde felt unnecessary to them. In a broader sense, this drawing is an example of social realism, drawing attention to working-class, everyday people. As stated in Figure 2, The Return from Bohemia was made with pastels, gouache, which adds a matte finish, and pencil on paper. Figure 3 shows the self-portrait portion of The Return from Bohemia. Pencil and pastels create realistic details to the figures' faces. The old woman's face is extremely expressive. Her emotions are very complex. Wood makes use of shading, cross-hatching, and shadows to add minute details to every portion of the drawing. The color palette is simple, just like the lifestyle of a farmer. The red barn stands out in the background. The drawing is not very large in person. One must get up close to appreciate all of the tiny details. The drawing measures only 23.5 by 20 inches and is hung at eye level, allowing one to look quite close at every detail. Figure 4 shows all of the tiny wrinkles that Wood added with pencil to his hand. His combination of pastel, gouache, and pencil creates a very unique, muted look. Most of his works are quite recognizable by his style. The figures in the background look downward, watching Wood paint. Their faces show signs of sorrow, yet contentment with what Wood is doing at the same time. To compare to another work from this time period, one can look at the work Ancient Mexico by Diego Rivera. An obvious difference from The Return from Bohemia is the depiction of Mexican history rather than American. Rivera also uses Cubist-style forms. Wood's figures are all photorealistic, unlike this mural. The figures in the mural are much more numerous and active than Wood's figures. Rivera depicts fighting, ceremonies, and people praying. There are numerous activities going on from foreground to background. Rivera is using symbolism to represent important aspects of Mexican history, such as his depiction of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. Wood shows a much simpler scene with the artist in the foreground and his family close behind in the background, gazing at his work in progress. Like Wood's drawing, Rivera's mural shows little to no avant-garde, European influence, and is an example of social realism. This piece, however, also is an example of socialist realism. Rivera followed communist ideals and even depicts Lenin in his mural. Also, the color palette is much more vivid, and the style is surreal compared to Wood's work. The Return from Bohemia is rather small, as previously stated 23.5 by 20 inches, compared to this mural, which covers an entire wall. The viewer can feel much more connected to Wood's drawing, as it is much closer to one's eyes and has fewer figures to focus on. Rivera went for an intense scene that requires the viewer to step back and look at his massive, chaotic story. Both do depict the struggles of a simpler life. The Mexican natives fight the Spanish for freedom, and Wood struggles to retain his sense of identity against an influential European appeal. I chose this piece because the realistic style of the painting jumped out at me. I already had some prior knowledge of Grant Wood and his regionalism influence. I love the nostalgia that exudes from this drawing. Wood is from Iowa, and his return from Bohemia very literally represents his denouncement of Europe, or Bohemia, to focus on painting his true home. One can also study the piece closer at the same time. What are the figures thinking? They seem disengaged from reality, just standing behind Wood while he paints. I like how one can see a big picture but also spend time studying the psychology further. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I quite enjoyed this topic, and hopefully everyone learned a few things about Grant Wood and the influence of regionalism on art in the United States.